it's wonderful that right out there, right out front, as you walk either by the building or into it, you will see her name.
I thought the dream candidate would be Jeannette Hayner, but I never thought that she would actually say yes if I were to approach her about being the board chair.
And she was just sitting there beaming. And then I looked over at her son and noticed that he had a tear coming down his eyes. And I thought, oh wow, how wonderful is that? She was a significant support in convincing her fellow senators, and I believe also members of the House, in supporting TVW.
Jeannette Hayner was absolutely key to our success, because I had been a Democrat, the chief of staff to the governor, and the Democratic majority leader of the State House of Representatives. We knew that this needed to be absolutely bipartisan, in fact nonpartisan, which was the ethic we sought to strike in our beginning.
There were a number of people who understood that this is good for the whole public's ability to know exactly what's going on. Jeannette Hayner, for instance, was a strong supporter. She was a Senate Majority Leader, and she was a good friend.
I thought the dream candidate would be Jeannette Hayner, but I never thought that she would actually say yes if I were to approach her about being the board chair. And I was talking to somebody else at some point, and he said, you know, I think she would. And I asked him if you would go ahead and maybe make the initial contact. He did, and then I followed up, and to my great and good surprise, she said yes. And she was very active, she was very involved. She was the chair for several years, and she had retired from the state senate, obviously. And she and Dutch, her husband, had been spending winters down in the desert in California. And in the years that we were trying to get it through the legislature, she would actually make phone calls to members of the legislature, lobbying them. This was the old days when we had long distance phone call bills. One of the people that she got that made all the difference in the world was the then Lieutenant Governor Joel Pritchard, a former Republican member of the United States House of Representatives and the chair of the Senate Rules Committee in his capacity as Lieutenant Governor.
Decorum wasn't one of Joel's strong points. He was pretty folksy about his approach to the being president of the Senate, and I think he was a little nervous about being on television as much as the presiding officer was going to be during coverage of the sessions.
He didn't much like the way C-SPAN had changed the U.S. House of Representatives, where we have these open minutes and people get up and they engage in these partisan rants and harangues. He didn't like that. He was a very civil person and much given to bipartisanship, as a matter of fact. And Jeannette let pass the idea that TVW would also cover the state Supreme Court. And a light went on in him. And he said, you know, like Brown versus Topeka Board of Education, right, at the U.S. Supreme Court, which we don't have on film, which was this incredibly historic case. You're going to cover the Supreme Court? And she said yes, and it flipped his vote like that. And we only came out of the Rules Committee, as I recall, by one vote. And that was as a consequence of Jeannette Hayner's on the phone all the time lobbying various members of the state legislature, particularly the Senate.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
After TVW went on air in 1995, it spent its first decade of existence in an aging office building in space that was once a bowling alley, which presented challenges for operating a television network. In 2002, TVW kicked off a major capital campaign to build a new headquarters and studio right across the street.
She had recognized, because of the fact that she came from Eastern Washington, the importance of her constituents and those who lived in Eastern Washington to be able to see what was going on in state government. Because otherwise they had to drive over the mountains to actually attend a hearing. And so we wanted to honor her and her leadership. And it was decided by the board that they would name the new building after Senator Hayner. I was in numerous conversations with people who talked about her leadership and her legacy and how much what TVW has done was to what she believed in. When we finally knew that we were going to be able to build this building, of course we had a ceremony. We had all the special shovels so that we could get the picture of digging the first ground for the new building. And we were honored to have Senator Hayner and her son there for the ceremony. Throughout the ceremony, people spoke about her leadership and her contribution. And it was a beautiful day. It was a beautiful day for everybody. It was very exciting. And at one point, I looked over at Senator Hayner, and she was just sitting there beaming. And then I looked over at her son and noticed that he had a tear coming down his eye. And I thought, oh wow, how wonderful is that we've been able to give back a little bit in what we're doing for this building, for her significant support and for her leadership and what she meant to this state. It's wonderful that right out there, right out front, as you walk either by the building or into it, you will see her name, and people will be able to remember what her leadership was and who she was and how important she was to TVW and to her belief in transparency and citizen engagement.